Hello, Accelerated Math 7-8 students. We are working in Module 14, and this is Lesson 14. The name of our lesson today is Graph of a Linear Equation, Horizontal and Vertical Lines. Okay, so today we will use standard form to learn about horizontal and vertical lines on a graph. The question that I want you to be thinking about during this lesson is, how do you identify a vertical and a horizontal line on a graph? And so basically what we're doing is we're looking at linear equations. Okay, we've been spending a lot of time on linear equations. Linear equations are formed when the x has an exponent of 1 only. Vertical or horizontal. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to graph this standard form equation right here when given the values, okay? And then after we graph it, you're going to tell me if you think that it is a vertical or a horizontal line. All right, so the question is, how do we graph it? Okay, well, we graph it by solving for y so that we can then find the ordered pairs to figure out what we're doing. So let's take a look over here first of all. It says ax plus by equals c. So now we're going to replace those values with the given ones. So it says that a equals 0. So we have 0 times any x value plus 1 times the y value equals 1.5. So now we've got to figure out what value of x and y would make this number sentence true. And so basically you have right here that x times 0, so 0 plus something times y, 1 times y equals 1.5. So we're trying to get this to be 1.5. So 1 times what gives you 1.5? Well, I'm thinking that if x is 0, x is not 0. 0 is the a value. But this is a 0 amount, and the only way to get 1.5 in the answer when you are multiplying something by 1 is that you're going to say that y has to be 1.5. Okay? And so if we plug that in, we have 1 times 1.5, right? So then we have 0 plus 1.5 equals 1.5. So that would mean that y has to equal 1.5. Well, now if we know that y equals 1.5, that means that we could probably figure out what x would be too. And so we're going to figure this out with the other format. So let's take our values, and we have 0 times x plus 1 times y, which we already know is 1.5. So we're going to do 1 times y equals 1.5. We're just going to turn this into slope-intercept form. So we need to subtract off 0x. So now we're left with 1 times y. So we already know that that's y. And then we have negative 0x plus 1.5. All right, so now this makes it easier to graph because remember, this value right here tells me where it crosses the y-axis, where it crosses the y-axis. This tells me the unit rate, how much it moves, unit rate, and this is the value of y. Okay, so now we can graph it. So this is telling me right here that I need to go up 1.5, and that's where it's going to sit. And now the unit rate, which tells us how it moves, is it says that you have negative 0 movement. So can you have negative 0 movement? Nope. So that means that the x is always going to be 0. So if the x is always 0, the y could be anything. So it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. So what that means is anytime x is multiplied by a coefficient of 0, the line will be vertical. Okay, so that's what we learned about that one. Okay, and now we're going to try this one. It says now on the same graph ax plus by equals c, where a equals 1, b equals 0, and c equals negative 2.5 in a different color. So I'm grabbing a different color. Sorry. So now we're going to do the same thing. And it says a equals 1, so we have 1 times x this time, right, because a equals 1, plus b equals 0 this time, so we have 0 times y equals negative 2.5. Okay, so I am going to first off get slope-intercept form. So I need to take negative, or subtract off 1x from both sides, right? And then I'm left with 0 times y equals negative 1x minus 2.5. And that, believe it or not, kiddos, is slope-intercept form. But what are we noticing? That y being multiplied by this coefficient is always going to be. Y is always going to have a value of 0 because you're taking any number that y could be and multiplying it by 0, which is 0. And so this time it says that we have 0 equals that. And so this is how we would plot it. Remember, this right here tells us where it crosses the y-axis, right? This tells us the unit rate, how it changes. Okay, and so then we would graph that. So we're going to go down 2.5, so 1, 2.5, and then it says, so that's our starting point, is right there, and then it says that we are supposed to go look at the unit rate. What does it say? Negative 1. So that means we're going to go down 1 to the right 1, because remember I told you that it has to be written as a fraction, so you would have negative 1 over 1. So whatever you do, you take the unit rate and you just divide it by 1 to get your rate of change or your movement. So that means we're going to go down 1 and over 1, so it would be here. Down 1 and over 1, and it would be here. Down 1 and over 1, and it would be here. Down 1 and over 1, and it would be here. Okay? And then, if you look at it, that's what this line would look like. Okay? And so, but the thing that's interesting about that is that it's telling us that the y always has to be 0. So if the y has to be 0, I don't think that we have these actually, because these all have to equal 0, so it would actually be like this. Because I forgot, it's supposed to be y is always 0. And the only way that y can always be 0 is if we have it like that. And so what kind of line do you see over here? Okay, you have a horizontal line. All right, so let's write the rule for this one. Anytime the y is 0, or multiplied by a 0 to make it a 0, the line will be horizontal. Okay, and so that's how you determine the difference between a vertical line and a horizontal line. Okay, so let's go over it again. When you have x resulting in 0, you get a vertical line because the y moves up and down. When you have the y being a 0, then you have a horizontal line because the x can be any value as long as the y is 0. Okay? So it's kind of an interesting situation when we're figuring out the difference between vertical and horizontal lines. All right. Today we will use the standard form to learn about horizontal and vertical lines on a graph, and that's what we did. And so I want you to just pay very close attention. When the x is a 0, the line is going to be vertical, and when the y is 0, the line is going to be horizontal. Okay? Because if the y is 0, that means there's no up or down movement. If the x is 0, that means there's no left or right movement. So that's how you tell the difference between the two. All right, we'll play with it some more with some practice in class, and I'll see you then. Bye.